All right, so I'm going to give a brief 5 to 7 minute talk of St. Ignatius, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about being leaven in the world. Rick, were you the one that gave the talk last year on St. Ignatius? Tom? Do you remember what century he was from? Because I didn't write that down.
Oh, 1400s.
It is. It's a 1400s.
Okay, so 1400s.
50s.
All right, so St. Ignatius of Loyola, for those of you that don't know, founded the Jesuits. That's what he's probably... Two things he's most famous for: founding the Jesuits, which actually I learned in preparing this talk that was actually a derogatory name for them, and then they kind of embraced it when they were called Jesuits, because the actual name of the organization was the Society of Jesus, and still to this day. So when you see a Jesuit priest, you'll see the SJ at the end of their name. That's what it stands for. Anyway, what I want to do is give you a little brief background on St. Ignatius. I'm not going to go into great detail, but just kind of pull out some of the highlights of his life. And then what I want to do is point out what are the lessons that we can learn from the saints. Because that's the purpose of the saint talks. It's, and I hope that's what you're getting out of these talks. It's not that a history lesson on these guys and gals, but for us to be able to draw out life lessons from these people who went through some of the very things that we've gone through before. That I think one of the things that we fall into the trap of is that we see these saints, we see the after picture, but we don't see the before picture. Okay, if y'all remember some of those weight loss ads, you see the person when they're big and then you see them when they're thin. We need to have that reference, and that's one of the reasons why it's important, and this is going to be one of the last things that I talk about, is how important it is for us to read the lives of saints, for us to read books like this, so that we can see ourselves in the lives of these people. Okay, they're all role models. Okay, so, and that's why we have them. That's what they're lifting up for. To see these are people that have been there and done that. All right. So anyway, St. Ignatius was an aristocrat and a member of the military. And during that day, the two kind of went hand in hand, and cared a lot about the way he looked and the way he dressed in particular. And he was probably a womanizer based on some of the letters that he wrote about his, I wouldn't call them confessions like St. Augustine's confessions, but the implications that he made in his letters that he wrote to some of his close friends, and feeling sorry for the past life that he lived, suggested that he had been a womanizer. There's no real evidence of that other than those letters, but it's a fair thing to gather from that. So he went off to war to gain glory, and he was in an accident. A cannonball struck his leg, broke his leg, and he was captured. And when they did the reset of the bone, it was done improperly. In fact, the bone was protruding. They had to cut part of the bone and reset it, and then they put weights on it to try to make it grow long. Okay, this is, way back before we had modern anesthesia or anything like that. And he was kind of a tough dude. But here's the interesting thing. He didn't like the way his leg looked, because, those was the days when they wore those stockings with their... And he didn't like the protrusion in the way his leg looked, so he had them re-break his leg again so that they could try to get it right, and it still didn't turn out right. So he walked for the rest of his life with a limp. This is just to give you an indication of how worried he was about the way he looked. So anyway, when he was in the hospital after the final time that the leg was broken to get it fixed and everything, he was laid up in the hospital for a good amount of time. And he was a pretty avid reader. And he wanted to read essentially the pulp fiction of the day. And they didn't have anything. Apparently this was, I guess, a Catholic hospital. All they had were books on the lives of saints and the life of Christ. So that's what he wound up reading. And in reading the lives of the saints, the first thing that was interesting is that the first thing that happened to St. Ignatius is that he said he started imagining himself like the saints, but not in the sense of just being a holy man, not from a kind of a holy standpoint, from the standpoint, I could do better than that. So he kind of made this kind of internal competition with himself as he was reading the lives of the saints. Eventually, though, as he continued to read the lives of the saints, God used that as a conversion experience for him. And by the time he got out of the hospital, he had determined to commit his life to Christ. And so that led to his conversion. So after his conversion, he went through a period of formal formation, of learning about his faith. Okay? So he had the conversion experience, then he went through some sort of formation. Does that sound familiar? Okay. And then he began his ministry. Then he began to share his faith. And part of establishing this ministry it didn't immediately start off and go start the Society of Jesuits, but he did one of the things that he's most famous for as well as his spiritual exercises. You know, we've talked about spiritual game plans. This was kind of the spiritual game plan that he set into motion. And throughout his life, he still met with physical suffering. You know, he not only the leg that continued to bother him, but he'd gotten sick. He underwent persecution not just from the people who weren't Christian, but within the church as well. And at one point, this is before he started the Society of Jesus, two things that happened. The first thing is he suffered from, how do you say this word, scrupulosity? Yeah. Anyway, what that word means, and I didn't say it very well, is this idea that you see sin everywhere, particularly in yourself. You never think, well, the first thing is we know we're never going to be perfect, but you're just overwhelmed in an unhealthy way about the level of sin that you have. And you see sin in even the smallest details. And there's a point where you can take that too far. And he suffered from that to the extent that he actually contemplated suicide at one time. Okay, so this is a guy that the church holds up as a saint. Okay, and he worked through that through his faith. All right, so what are the life lessons that I think that we should get from this? The first is that his before life and his afterlife, we can see some similarities in us. Like he suffered from ego, pride, and vanity. All right, have any of us suffered from that before? I know I have. Okay, so you know that's something that we can, you know, if God can take somebody like this that was full of himself and lift him up to be this guy that started this great organization, then there's hope for us. The second thing is that there's an importance in reading the lives of saints. Okay, and I think that's one of the big things that you can get from the life of St. Ignatius, is that it was through his reading of the life of saints that God touched his heart. Okay, and you know, we're given the communion of saints for that particular reason, so that we have role models. You know, if you study the lives of saints, and there are a number of different resources. It doesn't, you know, there are those little small books. If you go to the Joe Catholic website, one of the things that you see on the right-hand column is every day, the feast day for that particular saint, and they're often just short little paragraphs that you can reflect on. And you might find something about that particular saint that touches you. Not all the saints' lives are, you know, going to affect you the same way, but some will. And you'll wind up discovering that you have particular devotion to some. You know, all of you that know, and I know Lyndon knows it almost regularly, I'll quote St. Jose Maria Escriva, because he had such an important role in me discovering his writings and me getting to where I am right now in my walk of faith. So that's a reason, okay? When we struggle with things and we say, look, this is somebody that went through some of the same sort of struggles that I'm going through, and they were able to work through it with their faith in God. The other thing is that we can gather from his life is that there's a need for catechesis and formation. This idea of learn, live, share is not something that's new. You know, even in the life of St. Paul, if you look in the New Testament, you know, after he had his conversion experience when he was struck off the horse, one of the first things that he did was he went out into the desert for 3 years for formation. You know, we don't know if he was speaking directly with God or how that happened, or if he was meeting with somebody, but it's in Scripture that he spent time getting fortified in his own personal faith before he went out to proclaim the Word. Okay, and so that's an example for us as well. The next thing is that, look, suffering doesn't end just because we find Jesus. You know, there are a lot of these television evangelists that, you know, they proclaim the gospel of, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Prosperity.
Yeah, prosperity. Thank you. The gospel of prosperity that, you know, You find, and if you're not happy in your life, it's because you're not holy enough. And that's not true. Jesus told us that we have to carry the cross as well. And each individual one of us has a different cross that we might have to bear. And some people may go through their entire life and not suffer. Okay? God bless them. But most of us are going to encounter some sort of suffering in life, whether it be physical, emotional, or whatever it might be. Okay? That's part of life, right? Okay? And I contend it's easier to be strong in your faith when everything's going well. But can you be cheerful in your faith when things are going rough? Okay? And that's a form of evangelization as well. When people see that you're going through some crap, and that you still believe in what you believe, and you're still walking the walk, that's a powerful message to people. And then finally, that we can learn from St. Ignatius, that you have to have a game plan. Okay, how many of y'all played any sort of active sports? You might play football or basketball. You had a playbook, and if you didn't know that playbook, you were going to run the wrong plays, and you'd mess up, and the team would lose. Well, you got to have a playbook in your faith as well. And as Catholics, we have two things that we can use as our playbooks: the Bible and the Catechism. And these things, they go hand in hand. Anything that's in here, you're going to find in here. Anything that you find in here, you're going to find explained in here. This is our playbooks together, okay? The revelation of the faith. This is our playbook. I'm putting together a post for Joe Catholic, so don't get intimidated by the size of this book. This is just the New Testament, guys. This is the study Bible of the New Testament. But don't be intimidated by either one. Okay, particularly like this is the study Bible. The comments and content in here are incredible. This is the Ignatius Catholic Bible. Okay, and they're working on an Old Testament study Bible too. They've started to put out a couple of them, like the Genesis one I think is already out, and they're working their way through that. But the commentary down below. So that's something to think about. So anyway, those are things that we can gather from the lives of saints, and in particular St. Ignatius, St. 80. So.